Welcome to Oracle Eyes. The Russian occupation army is currently in a period of complete collapse following the recent offensives in Crimea and deep losses in Novomikhailivka. In the latest offensive, Russian forces tried a new strategy to bypass Vuhledar from the north by targeting Novomikhailivka. The battle for Novomikhailivka intensified as the Russians reached the outskirts. But with Russian forces lagging behind on the northern flank, success depended on breaking through from the south and cutting off Ukrainian supplies. Despite gaining some ground and preparing for the storm, the Russian advance was halted by the Ukrainian defense. The 79th Aircraft Brigade launched counterattacks, pushing the front line back 2 kilometers and forcing Russia to retreat to positions south of the swamp. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that in this attack alone, Russian forces lost 2 tanks and 7 armored fighting vehicles. In addition to material losses, the Russian occupation army is also known to have lost a large number of its personnel. This failed offensive emphasized the guiding influence of Ukrainian minefields on Russian movements and further exposed the incompetence of the Russian military command. Although the Kremlin has tried to hide its losses, the situation has become so obvious that every soldier in the Russian army is now aware that Moscow is leading them into an abyss. This massive crisis within the Moscow army is leading to Russian soldiers deserting or surrendering to Ukrainian forces. Today, there has been a dramatic development in the surrender issue, and a Russian commander has decided to surrender with his entire team to Ukrainian forces. The video of the Russian commander explaining his reasons for surrendering went viral on the social media platform X within minutes. It is known that the surrendered Russian commander is Robert Dmitry Viktorovich and was born on August 13, 1970. Viktorovich, the commander of the evacuation department and a senior sergeant, said that tonight he and his soldiers decided to end the war, because for them it was a meaningless war. The Russian commander said that this war did not concern them in any way. Viktorovich said that, "Let Putin take care of himself and leave us out of it." He said that he and the soldiers decided that they knew the way out and surrendered to Ukraine. Perhaps the most striking point in the commander's statement is that this war is no longer the business of Russian soldiers and Putin's pointless insistence. There was also a very critical study by the United States about this huge crisis within the Russian army. This study focused in detail on the current state of the Russian army, the latest movement of surrender cases and desertions within the army. The Kremlin's embargo on Russian media sources has led to the revelation of facts that were not published due to the embargoes imposed by the Kremlin on Russian media sources. The published figures also clearly reveal Russia's inner face in the Ukraine war. The reason why the Russian army has become like this surprises all those who hear it. How Kiev exploited the openings in Russian leader Vladimir Putin's army and how they turned this situation to their advantage is a new example in the history of world wars. In this process, Kiev, like Moscow, did not focus directly on media resources. Instead, the Kiev government was much more lenient than the Kremlin, even with Russians who did not want to fight. Over time, this led to major disintegration in the Russian army. Here is the unknown face of the war. The latest disasters within the Russian army have been proven by the latest critical and official update released by the United States. Lieutenant General Jonathan Braga, head of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, stated that Ukraine removed 17,000 Russians from the battlefield without firing a single shot. The main reason for Ukraine's ability to ensure the desertion of so many Russian soldiers without firing a single shot was characterized as a completely precise information operation. Lieutenant General Jonathan Braga underlined Ukraine's ability to exploit the low morale of the Russian army to conduct successful media campaigns. Ukraine's messaging efforts have therefore become an important tool in persuading thousands of Russian soldiers to leave their positions. Braga noted that through the active use of social media, the Ukrainian military and intelligence services obtained detailed information about Russian forces, equipment, and personnel, which formed the basis for effective attacks against individual soldiers and weakened their morale. At the tactical level, it is an innate and traditional military activity to erode the will and morale of individual soldiers, to erode the overall capacity of the unit, to impose doubt in the minds of the enemy. There are many examples of demoralization in the Russian army that could be exploited by the Ukrainian operations, and the Kremlin is trying to eradicate this phenomenon. These include Russia's draconian measures, such as the Soviet practice during World War II of executing soldiers who refused to obey orders or retreated, among others. Ukraine is well aware of this soft underbelly of Russia. There are already many soldiers in the Russian army who are disillusioned with war and oppose Moscow. The inhumane sanctions imposed on these Russian soldiers have only exacerbated Ukraine's efforts in this regard. Unwilling to die for nothing, Russian soldiers either chose to surrender to the Ukrainian army or deserted from the battlefield. It is tragic for Moscow that the number of surrenders or desertions within the Russian army has reached 17,000. So, while victory seems out of reach, an increasing number of Russian soldiers are desperately seeking escape routes. The I Want to Live surrender program, run by the Ukrainian armed forces, is emerging as a beacon of hope for these desperate soldiers. More than 22,000 Russian soldiers have surrendered, looking for a way out. Around 20,000 Russian soldiers refused to join the Russian army or deserted without joining the army directly, thanks to the digital efforts of the Ukrainian forces. All these data show that around 35,000 Russian soldiers were eliminated without firing a single shot. On the other hand, it is known that those who voluntarily surrendered through the I Want to Live app were recorded along with all other prisoners of war as those captured in the course of action in order to protect them from any reprisals by Moscow. In this regard, Andriy Yusov, the spokesman for the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Directorate, told the Ukrainian news agency Union that 1 out of every 5 prisoners of war captured by Kyiv surrendered voluntarily. Andriy Yusov also added that 3 to 5 Russian soldiers surrender every day under the I Want to Live program. Yusov also pointed out that the number of Russian soldiers deserting increased by almost 70% after the departure of Russian pilot Maxim Kuzminov, who flew a Mi-8 armored combat helicopter into Ukrainian airspace on August 23rd. For this reason, the I Want to Live surrender program has been gaining momentum in recent days in serving Russian soldiers. Lawyers and volunteers of the surrender program have counseled more than 1,000 soldiers who tried to desert. These latest figures prove both that the surrender rate of Russian soldiers has increased dramatically and that the I Want to Live surrender program has improved its structure considerably. As a result, the ripple effects of Ukraine's strategic and psychological warfare are deeply shaking the foundations of the Russian occupation forces. The latest surrender of a Russian commander and unit underscores a broader collapse in the ranks of the Moscow army. This is a direct result of Ukraine's relentless offensive and the persuasive power of the I Want to Live surrender campaign. This initiative not only offers a lifeline to frustrated Russian soldiers, but also strategically cripples enemy forces without firing a single shot. The growing frustration among Russian forces is a testament to the effectiveness of Ukraine's humanitarian approach to enemy combatants. This is in stark contrast to the harsh retaliatory measures in their own ranks. As the conflict continues, the I Want to Live program stands as a beacon of hope for those trapped in a war they no longer want to fight, further tipping the scales in Ukraine's favor as it navigates the turbulent waters of this conflict. Thank you for tuning in.